This is in many ways a gambit to stay in power. If this doesn't blow back against him, then he could be there for a very long time.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Donald Trump doesn't much like Pedro Sánchez, and the Spanish Prime Minister is perfectly fine with that. Unlike other European leaders who reflexively genuflect to the American president, Pedro Sánchez stands apart for his willingness to confront Trump, not for its own sake, but in the service of a theory of politics that diverges sharply from many of his European counterparts. As my guest, journalist Dave Keating, puts it, while other European leaders zig, Pedro Sánchez zags. Most recently, Sánchez enacted policies to regularize the immigration status of roughly 500,000 undocumented migrants living in Spain, granting work permits and other pathways to formally enter Spanish society and the economy. He has also resisted efforts to substantially increase defense spending while boosting Spain's support for international development and foreign aid. In today's episode, we discuss Pedro Sánchez's unique standing in European politics, why he's sometimes shunned by other leaders in Brussels, and whether his experiment in regularizing 500,000 undocumented migrants can actually succeed. Dave Keating is the Brussels correspondent for France 24, writes the Gulf Stream Blues Substack, and is the author of the new book, The Owned Continent: How to Free Europe from American Military, Economic, and Cultural Dependence. We recorded our conversation live via Substack, and to join one of these future live conversations, please visit globaldispatches.org and get a subscription. And as I record this, we are just 21 paid subscribers away from our February goal. If you follow the links in the show notes of this episode, you can unlock a discounted subscription and send me an email, and I will send you a sticker in the mail. Thank you so much. Really depend on your support. I learned a lot from this conversation. I know you will as well. Now here is my conversation with journalist Dave Keating. To kick off, Dave, the big sort of news, the most recent and really high-profile example of Pedro Sánchez doing something that is a complete 180 of how most other European leaders are approaching situation to challenge is on migration. At the end of January, Pedro Sánchez issued a decree essentially seeking to regularize some 500,000 migrants in the country in like dubious legal circumstances, basically make them a regular part of Spanish, economics, politics, give them work permits. Can you just explain what was that move exactly?
Yeah, this is one of many examples where while the rest of Europe zigs, Pedro Sánchez zags. And this is a very good example. So this regularization of immigrants without papers is what has long been called amnesty in the U.S. It's what the U.S. has done in the past. For instance, in the 1960s, there was a mass amnesty program in the U.S. for immigrants who had come through previous decades, who basically were there, were working regular jobs, had been there many years, but had come in irregularly and therefore were not actually able to get citizenship. My great-grandfather, for instance, benefited from that amnesty program in the US. This is similar, what Spain is doing now. So these are people who came illegally into Spain. have been working, but of course, because they're not registered, they don't have papers, they're not paying taxes to the Spanish state, and they're existing kind of in the black. So they can be easily exploited by employers, by housing providers. So this is an effort to regularize their situation. It basically brings them into the system. It does not give them citizenship. It essentially just regularizes their ability to work in Spain legally so that they can pay taxes and so their situation isn't so precarious. Now, why is Pedro Sanchez doing this now? This has long been a platform of his center-left Socialist Party, which he presides over. He is in a coalition right now with his own center-left party and far-left parties, in addition to some Catalan separatist parties. So this is a result of the whole coalition he's with. This has long been a platform of his center-left party. There's been long been desires to do this. There's really been calls to do this in a lot of different European countries, but Pedro Sanchez is going ahead with it. It is not without controversy. Of course, the center-right Popular Party, the PP, has been very furious about this, but no one has been as furious as the rising far-right party in Spain, Vox, who has been enormously critical of this decision.
I want to have you describe to me like the political circumstances in Spain that gave Pedro Sanchez the political will and ability to pull off what is seemingly an audacious move in the context of the rest of Europe. I mean, Spain seems to be doing like pretty well economically compared to a lot of other European countries. Does that add to his political power and the ability of him to make moves that otherwise more cautious politicians might not?
To understand Spanish politics, you have to understand the key date, which was the fall of Francisco Franco's dictatorship not very long ago, in 1975. Spain has had a very recent experience with fascism, and that prompted a big lurch to the left. And since then, Spain has really been on the vanguard of progressive politics in Europe. It was the third country in Europe to enact gay marriage, for instance, after the Netherlands and Belgium. It has been on the forefront of a lot of progressive taxation moves. And this is really because there was a big lurch to the left in Spain after the fall of the dictatorship. It's also the reason why there was no far-right party in Spain for decades until recently, until Vox came on the scene. And that's why a lot of people in Spain are particularly alarmed about Vox, because they don't have this history of having far-right parties in the recent past, like in France, like in Italy, like in other countries. So that's why this brand of progressive politics is particularly powerful in Spain. And it's why Spain's center-left is much further to the left than, say, Britain's center-left, which is more on the center ground with, say, the Democrats in the United States. So the reason why Pedro Sanchez is in power right now, he is kind of clinging on to power. He's had a whole bunch of close calls where he almost had to give up power. And in the last election, it actually really looked like he was headed for defeat. But he was able to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat by forming a coalition with these Catalan separatist parties and other separatist parties. These are parties that want Catalonia, the northeast region of Spain where they speak Catalan, to secede from Spain and form its own country. He formed this coalition with them, and as part of that deal, he promised to try to make Catalan, Basque, and Galician official languages of the European Union. I think something that he knew very well will never happen. Essentially, that was very controversial. Also, there was a legal referendum held in Catalonia over Catalan independence, and the people who called that referendum, he let them off, basically. That was part of it for them going into this coalition. That was enormously controversial, but that's why he's in power. It should be pointed out, it's not a big majority that they're governing with in the Spanish parliament. It's not like they're coming in, again, to compare them to Labour in the UK, which has this enormous majority at the moment, but isn't really doing much with it. Pedro Sanchez has a very slim majority, but he's doing a whole lot with it. And I think some of his critics on the right would argue that he's really throwing everything at the wall right now, because he senses his days are numbered, because his coalition is quite fragile. That's a criticism I hear about him from the right a lot. But so far, a lot of these initiatives are quite popular with broad swathes of the Spanish public.
This idea of kind of doing a lot and big things with a small coalition is kind of interesting to me. Before our conversation, I jotted down a few things that I've noticed as just a passive observer of international affairs. Really, Pedro Sanchez kind of came on my radar late, just this last fall around the UN General Assembly. I was at an event where he spoke at the Gates Foundation. They're giving him like a big award for the fact that Sanchez committed Spain to really substantial increases in its foreign development assistance and its global health spending at the exact same time that other European countries were sharply reducing that kind of spending. That was like interesting to me, and that's what kind of made me first perk up and start to notice Pedro Sanchez.
Yeah, and this is another instance where the rest of Europe is zigging and he's zagging. While other countries are cutting their foreign development budgets, Pedro Sanchez is increasing his. And I think this would be a good time to bring up something that he is controversial for in Europe, which is Spain's low military spending.
That was next on my list. Yes.
So we can maybe just jump ahead to that.
Yeah.
So while he's increasing all of this development spending, he's not falling in line with these orders coming from Washington to increase defense spending. He's had some controversial comments. For instance, he said Russia isn't about to cross the Pyrenees, so Spain doesn't need to spend as much on defense as presumably he meant countries in Eastern Europe like Poland. So while he's spending on these overseas development budgets, which are being cut across Europe, he's not increasing to the extent that's being asked military spending, and that is controversial.
Like at the most recent NATO summit, Donald Trump trumped a 5% across the board GDP spending from each NATO member on military. Pedro Sanchez was like the one European leader to be like, meh, no, we'll keep it at about 2.1%, which itself was like a substantial increase for Spain, but also another example of Sanchez directly confronting Trump in ways that European leaders are, at least in my opinion, only starting to do. Like recently and barely, he was early and forceful, I think, in his standing up to Trump. Last week, he had that op-ed in the New York Times in which he justified his decision to issue that decree on the 500,000 illegal migrants in Spain, but did so in a way that directly contrasted that decision to what we're seeing unfolding in the United States. Is he getting like political points in Spain for being such a forceful anti-Trump voice? And doing so, he's not like couching his criticisms in ways other European countries' leaders are.
I would say he's getting political points in Spain, but he is not getting political points in Europe. In fact, he has been majorly ostracized by the other European leaders because of his criticism of Trump. So over the past years, we've seen Europe's leaders bowing to Trump, genuflecting to him, giving in over and over to his demands. For instance, on the trade deal surrender that the EU signed with Donald Trump in July, total humiliation for the EU, which I detail in my book, The Own Continent, where President von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, flew to Trump's golf course in Scotland and signed this deal that promises to give $1.35 trillion of European money to the US in exchange for Trump capping his tariffs at 15% and not going above that, which is already an illegal tariff. So it's a totally lopsided deal. But all of the leaders of Europe decided to do this. They tasked von der Leyen at this European Council summit in June to do that. The leader of this surrender cheering squad has been Friedrich Merz of Germany, but also Giorgia Meloni in Italy has been pushing for surrender over and over. Emmanuel Macron, obviously people know the French are not big fans of the American protectorate in Europe, and they've long been warning about America's power in Europe. However, Emmanuel Macron is in huge trouble. He is basically considered a lame duck on the international stage in Brussels because of that disastrous snap election he called right after the European election in 2024, which made him lose control of the French parliament. So there really hasn't been any strong voice in Europe that's been standing up to Trump. Pedro Sanchez is the only one. He was the only one at that NATO summit to refuse to accept that 5% demand. And here's the reason. The 5% is ridiculous and arbitrary.
I did a whole episode on that last year, yes. It's a crazy amount of money.
It's a number that has been plucked out of thin air. The US spends 3.2% of GDP on its defense. So everyone just went along. It was this kind of emperor has no clothes situation. And Pedro Sanchez was the one at that NATO summit in June. He was like the little boy in the fable who was willing to point out that the emperor had no clothes. And for that, everyone else who was busy pretending he had clothes shunned Pedro Sanchez. There was a physical embodiment of that with the group family photo of all the leaders at the end of that NATO summit. You have Pedro Sanchez literally shunted off to the side. No one will even stand next to him because he has attracted Trump's wrath, and everyone's afraid to even be seen to be near him. So the thing with Pedro Sanchez is he has been the lone voice in resisting Trump over the past year. That is before Greenland, and we can talk about how things have changed over the past month there. A lot of people have been calling him Europe's Mark Carney, if you're only counting elected leaders. So I think Mario Draghi is also called that, but he's not a sitting elected leader. So in terms of leaders, Pedro Sanchez was also the only European leader to criticize the U.S. operation in Venezuela, which was obviously illegal under international law, but no European leader would say that. And in fact, most of the national leaders in the European Union praised Trump for that invasion of Venezuela. Pedro Sanchez was the only one who refused to do that, not only refused to praise Trump, but also criticized him and signed a statement with several Latin American countries, including Brazil and Mexico, condemning the U.S. action there. The problem is Spain is not a powerful European country. It's never has been. It is the fourth largest by population, but it's really neck and neck with Poland now. Poland is generally in Brussels, has a lot more power because Warsaw is seen as representing kind of all of the Eastern EU countries. And Spain doesn't really have a bloc. It only has the Iberian bloc along with Portugal. So Pedro Sanchez, although he has been very, in my opinion, quite courageous in a lot of his stances, he just doesn't have a lot of political capital to spend in Brussels. He's not someone like the French president or the Italian prime minister. And so he's kind of doing this all on his own, and nobody's willing to join him or even support him because the other European leaders have been so fearful of offending Donald Trump over the past year.
Now, has that dynamic changed at all since the Greenland mess? And have other European leaders come around, at least tepidly, to the view that Pedro Sanchez might be onto something here?
I don't think we're there yet. So definitely we saw a different reaction. Clearly, Greenland was a line that Trump crossed that garnered a different reaction from Europe than he's been getting. And he probably went there with Greenland because he's been getting nothing but surrender from European leaders over the past year. And we can see with Trump, the more people surrender to him, the more he picks on them. The countries that resisted Trump's trade war extortion threats, Brazil, China, India, they got off pretty easily. Trump kind of lost focus on them, but he's been laser focused on Europe. Why? Because he sees them as easy prey, because they gave in so quickly and so early. And he can feel kind of powerful. It's also for domestic consumption that he can throw his way around in Europe. He clearly stepped over a line with the Greenland thing, which he's now retracted. But the big question is whether it lasts, whether the newfound courage that some, not all, some European leaders found by sending their troops to Greenland in a show of force, even though, people like Friedrich Merz in Germany were denying that he was even doing that. I mean, he barely did it, you could say, or barely would even acknowledge that he was doing it. That may just be temporary. We haven't really seen a follow through on that. And I'll tell you, I do not hear the words Pedro Sanchez was right in Brussels very often. It's really off the radar, and it's really a shame because I think people are more likely to say the French were right or Emmanuel Macron was right. But Emmanuel Macron has not really been a profile in courage on this issue over the past year. Pedro Sanchez has. But he's just not a big player in European politics. And that's not because of him. That's because Spain has never been a big player, no matter who the leader is. And that's because of its position on the continent. It's often considered kind of peripheral and historically has not been a central player in the European Union. But that may change with Pedro Sanchez if he's able to garner more people around him in the coming weeks and months.
Has the U.S. administration meted out any specific retribution against Spain in response to Sanchez's outspoken opposition to Trump?
No, that's the interesting thing.
Meh.
It doesn't even seem to have attracted significant amounts of attention from the US administration. So we had Pedro Sanchez give the speech in Dubai about social media and tech, and we had the law that they're introducing to make social media companies liable for what happens on their platforms, also keep under 16s off of social media. And that attracted Elon Musk's wrath, who used his platform to attack Pedro Sanchez, Dirty Sanchez, as he called him, as a basically an illegitimate leader of Spain. So we've had that from Elon Musk, who is no longer a US government representative, although he was for some time last year. But generally, we've seen Sanchez kind of go under the radar from US MAGA types. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. There's been criticism, I think a lot from the right wing media, particularly after this immigration move. But we haven't seen the US particularly target Spain. And it's important to remember that they can't with trade threats. I think this gets lost very often in the US media, but the US cannot tariff one particular European Union country. The European Union is a country for the purposes of trade. So you either tariff the whole European Union or you don't tariff anyone. So when Trump threatened his specific tariffs on the 7 or 8 countries that sent troops to Greenland, that was crossing a line not only because it was using trade tariffs as a method of extortion to acquire territory, but also because it was basically invalidating the existence of the European Union. It would be illegal under EU law for any of those countries to accept such tariffs. It basically couldn't work. So the Trump administration cannot tariff Spain in particular. If Spain and other countries accept that, then the European Union collapses. So it's a long way of saying, no, they really haven't yet.
So we started this conversation and you noted that Sanchez actually has a rather thin political coalition at the moment. And I'm wondering if there is any evidence yet of blowback against Sanchez and his kind of like more audacious policies, particularly like around migration, that in such a way that might inspire a resurgence of more right-wing, far-right parties, particularly the Vox party that you said is like an emerging force in Spanish politics after Spanish politics essentially eviscerated its far-right parties following the end of the Franco regime.
So far, I haven't seen that. I think the thing to keep in mind is Spanish politics are incredibly polarized. It's one of the most polarized political dynamics in Europe, almost rivaling US levels, though not quite that bad, but still pretty bad. And so people on the right, even on the center right, even people in the PP, the things they say about the center left are vicious and vice versa. They really hate each other. So the thing is, for those people on the right who vote PP or vote Vox, they are never going to vote for PSOE in any event, right? So Pedro Sanchez doesn't have to worry about losing those people. He doesn't have them. He'll never have them. What he has to worry about is people who would vote left normally, who would feel alienated by this new migration move. And of course, we've seen that phenomenon in other countries, in the US, in the UK, where you have traditionally left voters being angry about migration issues and switching to voting for the right for that reason. So far, I don't see any evidence of that happening. And if anything, I'm seeing the left feeling quite energized in Spain. You know, Sanchez isn't without controversy, and there have been some corruption scandals actually within his government. I would say it's not unusual for Spain. I mean, PP governments in the past have had kind of an equal number of corruption scandals. This is a Mediterranean country. These things tend to happen. But it does, in the minds of many people on the center left, you do hear complaining about Sanchez. You hear this idea that there is corruption following him around. He's called the wolf by the Spanish public. There's these expressions saying you've been PSO'd, PSOE, meaning you've been kind of like manipulated. There's this feeling that there's something intangibly corrupt about him. So what he's doing now in standing up to Trump and in having such a bold migration move could actually ingratiate him to some segments of the left that have felt alienated by him. And by that, I also mean the far left as well, who also like to complain about him. So it could actually be a galvanizing force. But I think at the moment, it's too early to say.
What are some key inflection points coming up in Spanish politics that you will be looking towards that will suggest to you whether or not Sanchez's gambits have been successful?
I think we're going to have to watch regional elections coming up. So Spain has semi-autonomous regions, and different regions have different levels of autonomy. But regions do quite a lot in Spain. It's not quite a federal country like Germany or the US, for instance, but it's close to it. It's a bit like Belgium also, where you have like different levels of federalism. But these regional governments are very important. And I think that over the coming year, what people are going to be watching is local elections, regional elections, how are people responding to this? If there is a blowback, which again, I don't think we know yet, but if there is a blowback to the migration move, and let's say maybe the social media move as well, because Elon Musk is really pulling out all the stops here on social media to attack Sanchez and these social media policies, Sanchez is done. We know that for sure. This is in many ways a gambit to stay in power. If this doesn't blow back against him, then he could be there for a very long time.
Thank you, Dave, and we'll see you next time.
Great to be here.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.